Life has a way of slipping into autopilot without you even realizing it. That's where I was about a month ago, caught in the predictable rhythm of my days. My name's Kevin. I'm 39, married to Emma, who I thought was the love of my life. We've been married for 12 years, have 2 kids, and built a home filled with laughter, chaos, and the kind of love you don't question. At least, I didn't. Not until recently. Our lives were comfortable, even enviable. I worked in IT, the kind of job that pays the bills and lets me be home most evenings to help with homework or watch a movie with the family. Emma was the warm, grounding presence in our house, managing her work as a yoga instructor and balancing it with taking care of the kids. If you'd asked me a month ago how my marriage was, I'd have said we were solid, normal ups and downs, sure, but nothing that felt out of the ordinary. Looking back now, I can see the cracks. They were small at first. Emma started being on her phone a lot more, smiling at messages she'd never explain when I asked. She got a new wardrobe too, more stylish, more fitted. She said it was for her yoga classes, part of projecting confidence to her students. I teased her about her fashion show yoga, and she laughed it off. But something didn't sit right with me. I brushed it off because that's what you do when you trust someone. You believe in them, even when your gut whispers otherwise. I noticed other things, too. She'd linger in the bathroom for an hour at night with her phone. She started going to the gym at odd hours, saying she wanted to mix up her routine. Once, I walked past her while she was on the phone, and she lowered her voice mid-sentence. When I asked about it, she said it was just a conversation with her sister. Nothing unusual. But the way she smiled, not at me but at the memory of whatever she'd just said, made my chest tighten. Still, I didn't confront her. I told myself I was overthinking things, reading too much into little quirks. After all, we had a good life. She was my partner, my best friend. She couldn't betray me. Right? That's what I told myself. And for a while, I managed to believe it. But deep down, something had shifted. Something I couldn't ignore forever. It started with an ordinary Monday, the kind of day you forget before it even ends. I woke up at 6:30, just like always, got dressed, and headed to the kitchen. Emma was already up, sipping coffee at the table with her laptop open, dressed in her new gym leggings and a loose tank top. The way she smiled at me was quick, distant, like a reflex. Not the warm, lingering smile I'd grown used to over the years. I brushed it off, another moment to chalk up to stress, or exhaustion, or whatever other excuse I'd been using to quiet the growing unease in my chest. By the time I got home from work that evening, Emma was heading out the door, gym bag slung over her shoulder. "I'll be back in an hour," she called, her keys jangling in her hand. "The kids' homework is on the table if you want to check it." I nodded, distracted, watching her leave. The tightness in my chest was back, a familiar ache now, but I shoved it aside as I sat down with my youngest to review his spelling words. It wasn't until later that night, after the kids were in bed, that I noticed her phone charging on the kitchen counter. Emma was upstairs taking a shower, and I stood there, staring at the device like it was some forbidden artifact. We had always trusted each other. I had never felt the need to go through her things, but tonight, my hands moved before I could stop them. I picked up the phone and hesitated. The lock screen lit up, a simple photo of our family from last Christmas. It felt like a taunt. I swiped the screen, but it was locked. I sighed, placing it back on the counter and turning to leave. Then I remembered Emma was terrible with passwords. She reused them everywhere. On a whim, I typed in our anniversary, month and year. The screen unlocked, and I froze. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I'd find nothing, and this would all be some humiliating exercise in paranoia. But as I scrolled through her recent messages, the pit in my stomach grew heavier. There was a name I didn't recognize, someone saved as David G. I opened their conversation, and the world I thought I knew shattered. The messages weren't innocent. They weren't even ambiguous. They were raw, intimate, filled with inside jokes I didn't understand and plans for meetups that clearly weren't about yoga. I scrolled further, my hands trembling, my breath coming shallow. There were photos, 2 ones I'd never seen Emma take, ones I wouldn't have wanted her to take for anyone but me. I couldn't read anymore. I locked the phone and shoved it back on the counter, disgusted with her, with myself, with the entire situation. My hands were shaking, and I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. I couldn't stay there. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside into the cool night air, trying to think, to process, to breathe. My mind raced with questions, accusations, and bitter realizations. How long had this been going on? Who the hell was David G? Had she ever loved me, or was that just another lie? I felt like I was on the verge of some emotional freefall, teetering on the edge of rage and despair. When I finally went back inside, Emma was in the living room, her hair damp from the shower, scrolling through her laptop with a cup of tea. She looked up and smiled. "Hey," she said casually, like everything was normal. Like nothing had changed. I stared at her, wondering how she could sit there so calmly, so comfortably, when my entire world had just crumbled. But I said nothing. Not yet. I needed more. I needed proof. And most of all, I needed a plan. The next few days were a blur. I installed a small tracking app on her phone, one I'd found in an online forum late that night while I tried to sleep. It felt wrong, invasive, but I couldn't trust her words anymore, not when her actions were screaming something entirely different. The app gave me access to her messages, her location, even her call logs. It didn't take long for the truth to come pouring in. She met David G at a nearby coffee shop twice that week while I was at work. Their messages after each meeting were nauseatingly giddy, like two teenagers caught up in a whirlwind romance. By Friday, I couldn't take it anymore. I left work early without telling her and drove to the coffee shop she'd mentioned. I parked across the street and waited, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. It was almost 2 p.m. when I saw her. She walked in, smiling, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. A man followed her a few minutes later, someone tall, fit, and probably in his late 30s. David G. I watched them through the glass as they ordered, sat down, and leaned into each other like they shared some secret world. My stomach churned, but I couldn't look away. I stayed until they left together, walking side by side down the street. My chest burned with anger and betrayal, but still, I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed to see where this would go. I followed them at a distance, keeping my car a few blocks behind. They ended up at a small hotel. When they went inside, I parked down the street and sat there, staring at the building like it might offer me answers. It didn't. By the time I got home that night, Emma was there, acting like everything was fine. She asked how my day was, told me about the kids' schedules for the weekend, and even kissed me on the cheek before heading upstairs. I watched her go, my heart pounding in my chest. She didn't know it yet, but this was the last normal night we'd ever have. I was done being in the dark. Tomorrow, I would confront her, and no amount of lies or excuses would save her from the truth. The next morning, I woke up with my mind already set. The knot in my stomach tightened as I went through my routine. Emma acted like it was any other Saturday, oblivious to the storm brewing in the background. She was in the kitchen, making pancakes for the kids, humming to herself as if everything was perfect. I stood at the doorway, watching her. My chest tightened with every cheerful note she hummed, every flip of the spatula, every fake little smile she gave to the kids. How could she do this? How could she pretend everything was normal when I'd seen her walk into that hotel with him just the day before? After breakfast, I told the kids to head upstairs and clean their rooms. They groaned but went up anyway, leaving me and Emma alone in the kitchen. She was loading the dishwasher when I finally spoke. "We need to talk," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Emma froze for a moment, then turned to face me. Her smile faltered. "About what?" I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened the photos I'd taken of her and David at the hotel, and placed it on the counter in front of her. "About this." Her face went pale. For a second, I thought she might faint. She didn't pick up the phone. She didn't even try to deny it. She just stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to form words but couldn't. "What is this, Emma?" I demanded, my voice rising. "How long has this been going on? Who the hell is David?" I can explain, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Explain? Go ahead. Explain why my wife has been sneaking around behind my back, meeting some guy at a hotel. Explain how you can stand there every day, pretending to be a loving wife and mother, while you're screwing around with him. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel sorry for her. Not this time. She didn't get to cry. She didn't get to play the victim. It's not what you think, she said finally, her voice trembling. Don't insult me, Emma, I told back. I've seen the messages. I've seen the pictures. I followed you yesterday, for God's sake. I know everything. Her shoulders slumped, and she looked down at the floor. It's not serious, she said. It didn't mean anything. I swear. Not serious? I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. You're telling me that sneaking off to a hotel with another man isn't serious? That lying to my face every single day isn't serious? Do you even hear yourself? She flinched, but I didn't care. I was too angry, too hurt to hold back. How long? I demanded. How long has this been going on? She hesitated, and I could see her calculating how much to tell me, how much she could get away with. Finally, she whispered, 6 months. 6 months. Half a year of lies. Half a year of betrayal. Half a year of living with someone who didn't even respect me enough to be honest. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My hands clenched into fists at my sides, and I had to force myself to stay calm. Yelling wasn't going to solve anything, but it was taking everything in me not to lose control. Why, Emma? I asked, my voice low and cold. Why would you do this to me? To us? To our family? She wiped her eyes, but the tears kept coming. I don't know, she said weakly. I was lonely. Lonely? I repeated, incredulous. You're lonely, so you decide to fall in love with some guy behind my back? What kind of excuse is that? It wasn't like that, she protested. He was just someone who listened, someone who made me feel wanted. Wanted, I said, my voice hard. You mean I didn't make you feel wanted? Is that what you're saying? She shook her head, her tears falling faster now. No, it's not about you. It was never about you. It was my mistake, my weakness. I wasn't thinking clearly. I didn't mean for it to happen. But it did happen, I said, cutting her off. Over and over again, for 6 months. Don't stand there and tell me it was a mistake. A mistake is something you do once, Emma. This was a choice. A conscious, deliberate choice to betray me, again and again. She didn't respond. She just stood there, crying quietly, and for the first time in our entire marriage, I felt absolutely nothing for her. No pity, no compassion, no love. Just cold, empty rage. I want him gone, I said finally. If I find out you're still talking to him, it's over. Do you hear me? She nodded quickly, her tears streaming down her face. I'll end it, she said. I promise. Good, I said. Because if you don't, I will. And trust me, you won't like how I do it. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the kitchen. My heart was pounding, my hands were shaking, and I felt like I was going to explode. I needed space, needed to get away from her, from the lies, from everything. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. Where are you going? Emma called after me, her voice panicked. Out, I said shortly. And then I left, slamming the door behind me. Driving aimlessly through the city, I let the anger fester, each red light and honking horn feeding the fire inside me. I wanted to scream, hit something, do anything to release the pressure that was building. But instead, I kept driving, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly it felt like I might tear it apart. Emma's words echoed in my head. I was lonely. It wasn't serious. How could she say those things so casually, like they were supposed to excuse what she'd done? The betrayal wasn't just about her infidelity. It was about the lies, the disrespect, the utter disregard for everything we'd built together. I parked in the lot of a 24-hour diner, the kind of place where nobody asks questions if you sit in a corner booth for hours nursing a cup of coffee. The waitress brought me a mug and left me alone, and for the first time all day, I had space to think. Emma had promised to end it with David, but I didn't trust her anymore. Her promises were worthless, just words to placate me in the moment. If I wanted real closure, I'd have to take matters into my own hands. I started with her phone. The tracking app I'd installed had given me access to all her conversations with David, and now I read through them with a different purpose. I wasn't looking for proof of her affair, I already had that. Now, I was looking for leverage, something I could use to burn their little fantasy world to the ground. It didn't take long to find what I needed. David wasn't just some random guy. He was her personal trainer, a sleazy cliché come to life. But what made it worse was that he was married. His wife, Rebecca, was mentioned several times in their messages, usually as an obstacle or a source of irritation. The idea hit me like a lightning bolt. If Rebecca didn't already know about her husband's affair, she would soon. And I'd make sure she had every disgusting detail. The next morning, I called in sick to work. Emma seemed surprised but didn't question it, probably too busy walking on eggshells around me to push for details. I spent the morning gathering everything I had on her affair, screenshots of texts, photos of her with David, timestamps from the hotel. By the time I was done, I had a neatly organized folder full of evidence that painted a very clear picture of their betrayal. Finding Rebecca wasn't difficult. A quick search of David's social media led me to her profile, and from there, I found her work email. It felt invasive, but I reminded myself that she deserved to know the truth. The email I sent was short and to the point. I attached the folder of evidence and wrote, "Rebecca, I thought you should know what your husband has been up to. I'm not doing this to hurt you, but I believe you deserve the truth. Kevin." By the afternoon, I had a response. Rebecca wanted to meet. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop near her office, a neutral location where we could talk without interruptions. Rebecca was waiting for me when I arrived, a petite woman with sharp features and a no-nonsense demeanor. Her eyes were red, but she held herself with a calmness that made me wonder if she'd already suspected something was going on. "Kevin?" she asked as I approached. I nodded, sitting across from her. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice steady but strained. "And for sending me everything." "I'm sorry you had to see it," I said, and I meant it. "I just thought you should know." She nodded, her fingers gripping the edge of her coffee cup. "I had my suspicions," she admitted. "David's been distant. Secretive. But I didn't think he'd actually." Her voice broke, and she took a deep breath. We sat in silence for a moment before she composed herself. "What do you want to do about this?" she asked finally. Her question caught me off guard. I hadn't thought that far ahead. My anger had driven me to expose the affair, but now that the truth was out, I wasn't sure what came next. "I don't know," I admitted. I needed someone else to know. Someone who could understand what I'm going through." Rebecca nodded. "I get it." She hesitated, then said, "Do you want to confront them together?" The idea made my stomach churn, but it also felt right. There was something poetic about the two of us standing together, facing down the people who had betrayed us. We made a plan. Rebecca would confront David first, at their home, while I confronted Emma at ours. Then, once they were both on edge, we'd meet at a neutral location, a restaurant they'd been to together, one I'd found through their messages. It was petty, maybe even cruel, but I didn't care. They deserved to feel the same humiliation they'd put us through. That evening, when Emma came home, I was waiting for her in the living room. My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice calm as I said, "Sit down. We need to talk." Her face fell, and she sank onto the couch, wringing her hands. "Kevin, I already told you." "I don't want to hear excuses," I interrupted. "I want the truth. The whole truth. Right now." She hesitated, then started talking. She told me everything, how they'd met, how it started, how she'd convinced herself it didn't mean anything. Her words were full of regret, but I couldn't tell if it was regret for what she'd done or regret for getting caught. When she finished, I stood and grabbed my coat. "We're not done," I said. "I need you to go with me." Emma sat stiffly in the passenger seat as I pulled into the restaurant parking lot. She hadn't spoken much since I told her where we were going and why. I could feel the tension rolling off her, and for once, I didn't care. When I told her about Rebecca and how we'd agreed to meet here to lay everything out, Emma's face had gone pale. She didn't protest, didn't try to talk me out of it, she just nodded mutely and grabbed her bag. That silence was more damning than any excuse she could have made. I parked, turned off the engine, and sat there for a moment, gripping the wheel. Emma didn't move. "Are you ready for this?" I asked, though I didn't know why I bothered. She nodded, but it was mechanical, like a puppet responding to a string being pulled. We walked into the restaurant together, and I immediately spotted Rebecca and David seated at a table near the back. David was turned slightly, whispering something to Rebecca, who looked as composed as someone in her situation could. She was gripping a glass of water tightly, her jaw set. The hostess didn't even have time to greet us before I strode past her toward the table. Emma followed a few steps behind, her head down like a guilty child. Rebecca noticed us first. She straightened in her seat, fixing her gaze on Emma. David turned next, his face instantly clouding with discomfort when he saw me. "About time you showed up," Rebecca said, her voice cold. "Let's get this over with," I said, pulling out a chair. Emma hesitated, glancing at me, but I didn't look at her. I didn't want to. We sat down, the four of us in a strained, awkward silence. The air felt heavy, every tick of the restaurant's clock on the wall marking the passing of time that none of us knew how to fill. Rebecca broke the silence first, addressing Emma directly. "So," she said, her voice sharp. "Care to explain why you thought it was okay to sneak around with my husband for 6 months? Emma flinched, her hands twisting in her lap. I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice shaky. "That's not an explanation," Rebecca told back. "That's an excuse." David started to speak, but I cut him off. "Let her answer," I said firmly. Emma hesitated, her eyes darting toward me, then back to Rebecca. It just started small," she said weakly. "At the gym. He was easy to talk to, and things just escalated." "Escalated?" Rebecca repeated, her tone mocking. "That's what we're calling full-blown affairs now?" Emma looked down, her face burning red. "I didn't want to hurt anyone," she murmured. "Well, congratulations," I said coldly. "You did." David, who had been silent so far, finally spoke up. "Look, this is getting out of hand," he said. "We didn't plan this. It just happened." Rebecca turned on him, her voice rising. "Oh, spare me. You didn't plan it? Are you hearing yourself, David? Do you think that makes it better somehow? It wasn't serious." David protested, his voice defensive. It was just something that happened." "Not serious?" Rebecca's laugh was harsh and humorless. "You're seriously going to sit there and tell me that sneaking around with her for 6 months wasn't serious?" Emma's head snapped up at that, her voice trembling. "It wasn't about you, Kevin," she said to me, her eyes pleading. "Not about me?" I repeated, my voice rising despite my effort to stay calm. "You lied to me for 6 months, Emma. You humiliated me, disrespected me, and put our entire marriage at risk. How is that not about me?" She started to cry, her hands covering her face. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "Sorry doesn't cut it," I said flatly. "Not this time." Rebecca leaned forward, her eyes locked on David. "So, what now?" she asked. "What's your plan, David? Keep sneaking around, or have you finally gotten whatever thrill you were chasing?" David looked at her, his jaw clenched, but he didn't answer. "That's what I thought," Rebecca said, her voice dripping with disdain. She stood abruptly, grabbing her bag. "I'm done here. Kevin, I wish you luck." As for you, she glared at David, her voice hard, don't bother coming home tonight. With that, she turned and walked out, leaving the three of us sitting there in silence. I stood as well, looking down at Emma. We're leaving, I said. She got up without a word, her eyes puffy and red, and followed me out to the car. The drive home was silent. When Emma and I returned from the restaurant, the weight of everything that had happened over the past weeks pressed down on me harder than ever. The car ride home was silent, both of us trapped in our own thoughts. I parked in the driveway, but neither of us moved right away. I stared straight ahead, gripping the wheel, while Emma fidgeted with her hands in her lap. Inside the house, I went straight to the living room, dropping my keys on the coffee table before sinking onto the couch. Emma followed, stopping a few feet away, unsure of what to say or do. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, trying to steady my thoughts. We need to talk, I said finally, my voice quiet but firm. Emma nodded, walking over to sit in the armchair across from me. She looked small, defeated, like she was bracing for the worst. I don't want excuses, I said. I don't want promises you can't keep. I want to know where we go from here. She nodded again, her hands gripping the edge of the chair. I'll do whatever it takes, she said softly. Therapy, counseling, anything. I'll cut off everyone if that's what you want. Just tell me how to fix this. I studied her for a moment, trying to gauge whether she truly meant it or if it was just desperation talking. Do you really think this is something you can fix? I asked. I don't know, she admitted, her voice breaking. But I have to try. I can't let this end like this, Kevin. I can't lose you. Her words stirred something in me, but I couldn't tell if it was anger, pity, or something else entirely. Do you even understand what you've done? I asked. What you've destroyed. Yes, she said, tears streaming down her face. And I hate myself for it. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm begging you to give me a chance to make this right. I leaned back, running a hand over my face. It's not just about forgiving you, Emma, I said. It's about trust. And I don't know if I can ever trust you again. She started to cry harder, but I didn't comfort her. I couldn't. You don't have to decide now, she said through her tears. Just, don't give up on us. Please. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I sat there, staring at the floor, letting the silence stretch between us. Finally, I said, I need space. I'm moving out for a while. I need time to figure out what I want, what's best for me, for the kids, for everyone. Emma's face crumpled, but she nodded. Okay, she whispered. The next morning, I packed a bag and moved into a small apartment a few miles away. The kids stayed with Emma, and we told them together that I was leaving temporarily while we worked through some things. It wasn't an easy conversation, but we kept it simple, focusing on the fact that we both loved them and wanted what was best for them. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. I went to work, spent time with the kids whenever I could, and started therapy to process everything. Emma reached out often, apologizing over and over again, offering to go to counseling or do whatever it took to earn back my trust. But I kept my distance. Over time, the anger began to fade, replaced by something quieter and more painful, acceptance. I realized that while I didn't hate Emma anymore, the love we once had was gone. It had been chipped away piece by piece until there was nothing left to hold on to. When I finally told her I wanted a divorce, she broke down. She didn't fight me on it, didn't try to change my mind. I think she knew it was inevitable. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. We agreed on shared custody of the kids, and while it wasn't the future I had imagined, it was one I could live with. In the end, I learned that some wounds never fully heal. But they can teach you something about resilience, about boundaries, about what you're willing to accept and what you're not. As for Emma, I wish her peace. She has her own journey to take, and so do I. My life looks different now, but it's my own again. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I can breathe.